A person with money and a person without money can face the exact same $600 problem and end up living in completely different universes. One pays $600 once. The other pays $600 plus interest, plus fees, plus lost time, plus stress, plus whatever new problem gets created while the first one is still unresolved. That difference matters more than people realize. Because when people talk about financial struggle, they usually talk as if the issue is simple arithmetic. Less income, less money. End of story. But that is not how real life works. Real life is uglier than that. Real life says that once your margin gets thin enough, the price of everything starts changing. Not officially, not on the shelf, not in some way that gets announced to you, but functionally, your version of the world becomes more expensive than someone else's. The same groceries cost you more because you cannot buy enough at once to get the better value. The same car problem costs you more because you cannot fix it when it is small. The same bad week costs you more because your only form of flexibility has a 24% interest rate attached to it. The same 24 hours feel shorter because every task takes longer when you are improvising around a shortage. And that is why a lot of people are not just trying to get ahead. They are trying to survive a version of everyday life that keeps adding penalties for being under-resourced. Picture a normal month. Your phone bill hits. Rent hits. Groceries hit. Your kid needs something for school. Your tire pressure light comes on. You are already doing that mental Tetris thing where every bill has to slide into the exact right position or the whole structure starts leaning. Now imagine the tire actually goes. Not all four, just one. If you have savings, this is annoying. You buy the tire, maybe grumble a little, then go on with your life. If you do not have savings, now you have decisions. Can you drive on it for 3 more days? Can you patch it instead of replacing it? Can you borrow a car? Can you miss a shift? Can you put it on a card? Can you afford the card? Can you afford not to? Suddenly, this is no longer a tire problem. It is a cash flow problem, a work problem, a debt problem, a stress problem, and maybe next week it becomes a bigger car problem because delaying cheap fixes is one of the most expensive habits poverty forces on people. That is the point of this whole conversation. Being broke is not just difficult because you have less money. It is difficult because life stops offering you the discounted path. You lose access to the calm version of problem solving. And once that happens in enough areas at once, progress starts feeling weirdly impossible even when you are trying hard. The hidden price tag on not having room. There is a certain kind of financial advice that sounds smart only if you already have a little breathing room. Buy in bulk. Wait for the sale. Use your emergency fund. Take the lower interest option. Fix it early. Shop around. Negotiate. Be patient. Think long term. Great advice. Unless you are broke. Then half of those smart decisions require things you do not have. Cash. Time. Energy. Transportation. Credit. Predictability. A month that does not fall apart halfway through. This is where people misunderstand struggle. They imagine poor financial outcomes are mostly caused by poor financial judgment. Sometimes, sure. But a huge amount of the damage comes from being forced into shorter-term, uglier, more expensive decisions because the cleaner decision had an admission price. And that admission price was margin. No margin means no patience. No patience means no leverage. No leverage means whatever costs money today gets to win. That is not laziness. That is not a character flaw. That is what happens when your finances are operating with no suspension system. Every bump gets felt. Food is one of the clearest examples. Let's start with something ordinary. Laundry detergent, rice, chicken, toilet paper, shampoo, baby wipes, pet food, frozen meals, medicine. People with cash buy value. People without cash buy survival. That is the entire difference. If you can spend $19 now, maybe you get the larger package that lasts the month and gives you the lower cost per unit. If you only have $6 right now, you buy the tiny version that feels cheaper in the moment and ends up costing more over time. This happens constantly, and not just in stores. It happens in food choices too. The person with money can stock the kitchen, buy staples, plan meals, store things, and absorb a week where prices are a little stupid. The person without that cushion buys what gets tonight handled. And buying tonight's solution over and over again is almost always more expensive than buying the week's solution. Not because they do not understand math. Because math still has to fit inside Tuesday. That difference is invisible to people who have never had to choose between better value and enough to get through the next 48 hours. They look at the receipt and see the wrong item. They do not see the wrong financial environment. Broken things get pricier when you are broke. Now let's move to repairs, because this is where poverty becomes almost theatrical in how unfair it is. Small problems are for people with savings. If you have money, a loose belt in the car is a belt. A dental issue is a filling. A leak is a plumber visit. A late utility bill is an inconvenience. A doctor visit is a copay and a sigh. If you do not have money, all of those things are allowed to evolve. And evolution is expensive. The belt becomes more damage. The filling becomes a root canal. The leak becomes drywall plus mold plus a terrible Saturday. The late utility bill becomes a fee, then another fee, then a reconnection fee. The doctor visit becomes maybe it will go away, which is one of the most financially dangerous phrases in adulthood. When people have enough buffer, they get to buy early. When people do not, they buy late. Late is expensive. Late means interest. Late means fees. Late means secondary damage. Late means the original problem gets friends. A rich person's mistake might cost money. A broke person's mistake often gains momentum. That is a brutal difference. Debt is where the system gets openly hostile. Now, let's talk about borrowing. Because borrowing is one of the clearest places where the world practically admits it prefers helping people who already look safe. Cheap money goes to people who need it least. Expensive money goes to people who need relief the most. That alone should bother more people than it does. Someone with strong credit, solid income, and savings gets decent rates, rewards, flexibility, introductory offers, and a whole parade of financial institutions trying to hand them polished products. Someone who is already stretched gets a much uglier menu. Penalty APRs, payday loans, installment products with bad terms, overdraft charges, high-fee personal loans, buy now pay later arrangements that multiply small pressure into longer pressure. Let's do simple math. Two people get hit with a $1,800 emergency. Person 1 pays cash. Total cost, $1,800. Person 2 puts it on a credit card at 25% APR and manages to pay $100 a month because that is realistically what the budget allows. Now the emergency is not just expensive. It becomes sticky. Interest keeps attaching itself. The balance hangs around. The next small setback lands on top of the old one. And before long, the issue is no longer, I had one bad month. The issue is, I am still paying for April and September. That is what high-interest debt does. It turns life events into subscriptions. Time is one of the most underrated forms of wealth. This part gets ignored because people treat money and time as separate categories, but they are constantly converting into each other. Money buys speed. It buys fewer trips. It buys preventative maintenance. It buys delivery when needed. It buys a reliable car. It buys living closer. It buys smoother logistics. It buys the ability to solve the thing once instead of managing the thing 6 different half-effective ways. When you do not have money, you spend more time keeping life functional. More time on buses. More time waiting. More time comparing prices because every dollar matters. More time juggling bill dates. More time on hold with customer service trying to avoid a fee. More time patching systems that would be easier to solve with cash. And that time loss has economic consequences. You are more tired, more distracted, more likely to miss details, more likely to say yes to the expensive convenience option later because your bandwidth is gone, more likely to overlook deadlines, auto-pay timing, paperwork, renewal windows, and all the tiny administrative traps modern life scatters everywhere. People love talking about bad spending decisions as if they happen in a vacuum. They do not. A lot of them happen when someone is exhausted from managing scarcity all day. At that point, the $18 convenience purchase is not just a treat. It is a coping mechanism for a system that already extracted 3 hours and most of your attention. Optionality disappears first, and that changes everything. This is where the financial issue becomes a life issue. When you are broke, you do not just lose money. You lose negotiating power. You cannot wait for the better apartment because the current lease is ending now. You cannot hold out for the better job because bills are due now. You cannot risk switching industries because the transition might get messy now. You cannot say no to a bad arrangement because your survival horizon is too short. That matters because patience is one of the highest return assets in adult life. Patience lets you refuse bad deals. Patience lets you compare options. Patience lets you leave environments that are draining you. Patience lets you choose based on quality instead of urgency. Without cushion, urgency becomes your manager. And urgency is very expensive. It gets people into predatory loans. It gets people into worse jobs. It gets people into apartments with bad terms. It gets people into cars they should not finance. It gets people paying whatever today demands because tomorrow is not available for negotiation. This is one reason money changes people's lives long before it makes them rich. Not because they suddenly buy luxury, because they regain the right to wait. And the right to wait is financially powerful. Why this gets misread as irresponsibility? From the outside, the poverty premium often looks like chaos. Somebody pays interest again. Somebody gets hit with another fee. Somebody buys the wrong quantity. Somebody uses expensive transportation. Somebody delays a repair. Somebody takes a loan with ugly terms. And observers who already have cushion look at those decisions and think, I would never do that. Maybe not. But would you never do that with zero room, no savings, weak credit, a fragile schedule, no family backup, and stress levels high enough to make simple admin feel like a military exercise? That is a different question. A lot of people are being judged as if they are making decisions from the same starting point as someone with reserves. They are not. One person is choosing from 5 acceptable options. The other person is choosing between bad, worse, and not possible. That does not erase responsibility. It does change the analysis. Because the same behavior can mean totally different things depending on whether it came from carelessness or constraint. And constraint is expensive. The first phase of getting ahead is not glamorous. This is important because people get discouraged here. When you are paying the poverty premium in multiple parts of life, the first stage of progress often feels invisible. You do not feel richer. You feel less punished. That is a huge distinction. Your first $500 in savings is not exciting because it does not transform your lifestyle. It transforms the next small disaster. Your first $1,000 is not impressive because it does not buy status. It buys fewer bad options. Your first bit of breathing room is not about looking successful. It is about interrupting the chain reaction. That chain reaction matters more than people realize. Because once one emergency no longer turns into debt, and one late bill no longer turns into 3 charges, and one repair no longer grows into a bigger repair, the financial math finally becomes less hostile. That is the moment a lot of people mislabel as slow progress. It is not slow. It is structural. You are not trying to sprint toward wealth yet. You are trying to get out of the part of life where every setback arrives with a surcharge. What actually helps? Not slogans. Not aesthetic budgeting. Not someone online yelling about lattes. What helps is reducing the number of areas where scarcity gets to charge you extra. Start with a thin emergency layer. Not a fantasy emergency fund. Not 6 months immediately. Just enough to stop routine bad luck from automatically becoming credit card debt. Then protect cash flow. If your month has no breathing room, everything stays fragile. So the goal is to create a little space between income and the next problem. That might mean cutting something, restructuring something, renegotiating something, or earning a bit more. None of that is glamorous, but glamour is not the assignment right now. Stability is. Then attack high-interest debt like it insulted your family. Because high-interest debt is not just expensive. It keeps the whole scarcity machine alive. It ensures that yesterday's problem keeps standing in tomorrow's kitchen eating your groceries. Then look for the expensive instability points. The car that keeps creating crisis. The bill structure that keeps generating fees. The subscription pile you barely notice. The unreliable system that costs more in chaos than it does on paper. The recurring problem that looks small each month but large across a year. And when income improves, resist the temptation to spend the first signs of progress on visible upgrades. The early money should go toward making life cheaper later. That means buffer. That means reliability. That means fewer fragility points. That means solving the hidden leaks before chasing the obvious rewards. Because the entire goal is to move from emergency pricing back to normal pricing. The bigger point underneath all this. A lot of financial conversations are secretly moral conversations. People want to know who is disciplined, who is careless, who deserves sympathy, who deserves blame. But money often behaves more like physics than morality. Pressure changes outcomes. Friction changes outcomes. Margin changes outcomes. Speed changes outcomes. Once you understand that, a lot of everyday struggle makes more sense. The person paying more is not always less intelligent. The person falling behind is not always less serious. The person using the ugly option is not always worse at money. Sometimes they are just living inside a more expensive version of the same world. And the work of improving your finances is not only about earning more. It is about escaping that version of the world, the part that should stay with you. If life has felt punishingly expensive lately, there is a reason that feeling lands so hard. Because at a certain level of financial fragility, you are not just buying things. You are buying access, timing, speed, repair, flexibility, and recovery. And when you cannot afford those directly, you rent them at terrible rates. That is why progress can feel so frustrating in the beginning. You are not only building upward, you are dismantling penalties. You are trying to get to a point where one problem stays one problem, where one bill stays one bill, where one emergency does not become a season, where one mistake does not need 6 months of cleanup. That is what cushion really does. It does not just make you wealthier. It makes the world stop charging you extra for being under pressure.